This lesson is about solving equations using the distributive property. So we've learned about using the distributive property. We've also learned about solving two-step equations. Basically what's going to happen in this lesson, in order to solve these equations, the first thing we're going to be doing is using distributive property, and then we're going to be solving the equations like we did using the two-step equation method. So we're going to skip over to example 2. Example 1 was a problem we didn't really necessarily need to have distributive property in order to solve, so that's why we skipped that. Example 2, we are given a problem that has a number next to the parentheses, so we are going to be using distributive property here. Like I said, to start out with, we have a number next to the parentheses there. We are going to distribute to start off. So distributing, remember, we're multiplying the number outside the parentheses to everything inside the parentheses. So if we want to go over here, we can say we're going to be doing negative 5 times s plus negative 5 times 30. Make sure we distribute to both of those so the one doesn't feel left out here. No frowny faces. When we do that, after we distribute that, the book's going to show a slightly different look maybe from what you guys would, but we should get to a point here of having basically 5s plus negative 150 equals negative 17. Plus negative 150 is the same as minus 150 that the book has. If you want to look at this and say, well, if I've got plus negative 150, they're adding, I need to subtract. Here's the part that's a little tricky, maybe depending how we look at this. If we have plus negative 150, we say we're adding negative 150. We subtract negative 150. What happens if we subtract a negative 150? We might want to do what? Add the opposite. So subtracting a negative 150 is actually the same thing as adding a positive 150 if we add the opposite there. So adding a positive 150. At this point, we might notice when we combine those are different signs. We have more that are positive. Different signs. We're going to subtract, take the difference there, and see we have 133 more positives than negatives. So that's how they're getting to their next step here. Again, a little bit different look in your book since they're writing things sideways. And then now it's like what we did before. They're multiplying by negative 5. We can divide by negative 5 to get our answer. And again, when you divide, that doesn't come out evenly. So it's negative 26 3/5. If you did that as a decimal, would be negative 26 6/10 would work also. Either one of those would be okay. So kind of the one thing, rather than distributing, the only real difference you might see on this problem is in the step about that we had a plus negative 150 there. And again, if you want to, like the book's doing, adding a negative 150 is actually the same thing as subtracting 150. So you can either rewrite it to where it's subtracting 150, or if you do it this way, adding negative 150 means we got to subtract a negative 150 and then add the opposite, and you'll end up doing the same thing that they're doing in the book here. Example 3. The cheerleading squad received 1/4 of the total sales of foam fingers and pom-poms at a pep rally. The squad received a total of $136.75. What was the value of the pom-pom sales P? So you can see over in the picture there, they're giving us some information. They got $458 in sales on foam fingers. So we're just taking the information, making an equation. So it's 1/4 of their total sales. They're selling pom-poms and foam fingers. So 1/4 of that total is what we're looking for, is going to be equal to the total they received. Well, Pom-pom sales, we don't know what that is, so that's going to be our variable. That's where they put the P there. Foam finger sales, I just mentioned, they said was $258. So 1/4 times that whole thing, that whole quantity added together, equals the $136.75 that they earned. So off of that equation then, once we get that set up, if we're okay with that, is going to be distributing. So again, the book actually is showing it on this one pretty well. They showed it on the last one too. I didn't realize that. But so we're distributing. So 1/4 times P plus 1/4 times 258 equals the 136.75. 1/4 times P is just the same as 1/4 P. And then 1/4 of 258. They got 64 5/10. How would they work that out? How would we work out to find out 1/4 of 258? So to find that, two ways of doing it. One way to find 1/4 of something is dividing it by 4. So 258 divided by 4. Another way we could do that, 1/4 actually is a nice decimal, is 2500ths. You could say 2500ths or 0.25 times 258. And that would be how we could get that 64 5/10. Once we've done that, like I said, after we distributed that, now we're back where we were in the last lesson where we just have a two-step equation. So we can see there adding means we need to subtract. Again, the way we're doing it, we don't have to rewrite all this other stuff. Okay, we're ready to go here. Subtract just right underneath those is fine. And then those will cancel out. And then on the other side, you subtract, you get $72.25. And then two different ways to finish this off. One way the book's doing is they're saying that, that'll work, I guess. They're saying that we could multiply, if it's 1/4 of P, if we multiply that by 4, that'll give us 1P. Another way you could do this, you could say they're multiplying it by 1/4 means we could divide. So we divide by 1/4. Again, if you wanted to, you could change the 1/4 to a decimal as a 0.25 there. And that is probably be to our advantage in this case. Just change that to a decimal. If it wasn't a decimal, remember dividing fractions, you need to keep change reciprocal. And then when you work that out, you should get the $289, just like the book did doing it their way. On this problem, a little bit different setup you could have done as well that would not have required using distributive property is you could have actually just said, well, it's 1/4 of each thing. So we could have actually gone right to the step after we distributed. We could have said 1/4 of the pom-pom sales, so 1/4 times P, plus 1/4 of the foam finger sales, so 1/4 times 258. We could have gone straight there, equals 136.75. So some of these, they're showing us, you know, this is my equation, I've got to distribute. Sometimes you can set it up differently to where you actually don't even need to distribute. There may be some problems if you look at the bottom of the page here, the try it. These are already equations set up for us to distribute, so we don't really have much say in that. If it's already set up, we've got to pretty much use distributive property in order to solve those. So if we look at the try it part A, it says use the distributive property to solve. By the way, normally when we're given a problem like this, it is not going to say, hey, you're going to use the distributive property on this problem, just so you know. The directions generally would just be solve the equation or solve, okay? They're not going to be specific as to what steps you need to do. But if we see a number next to the parentheses, we should be familiar with that idea that we are going to need to distribute. One thing before we distribute here, if we want to, we could do what? Add the opposite. Good. Inside the parentheses, they're subtracting, so if you want to add the opposite there, you can. may make things a little easier for us to see. Alright, so we're going to distribute, so we'll do negative 1/2 times b plus negative 1/2 times negative 6. Make sure you distribute to both of those. The 5 is on the other side of the equation, so it does not get distributed to here. Alright, so we'll have a negative 1/2 times b. The next part, we multiply negative 1/2 times negative 6. Negative times negative is positive, and basically we're taking half of this then. You know, negative times negative is positive. If we do half of 6, it would be 3. Okay. And again, if we're not sure about what's happening there, we can, you know, rewrite these. Negative 6 over 1. Negative times negative is positive, so that's be 6 over 2, and then 6 divided by 2 is 3. You'll get the same thing. If you'll notice at this point, now we have a two-step equation. So a two-step equation, first thing we need to do would be?
Divide.
Okay. First thing would be to subtract 3. They're adding 3. We're going to subtract 3. And then one last step, we can see they're multiplying here is generally how we probably think about this. They're multiplying by negative 1/2. We divide by negative 1/2. Occasionally I see people, instead of just dividing by negative 1/2, they divide by negative 1/2 b in this case. Remember, the b we want to keep there, just the negative 1/2 we want to get rid of. Alright, when we do that, if we were not using a calculator here, we'd want to work it out like this. Keep change reciprocal. The negative sign can go either spot when you do that. And so that would end up being negative 4. If you had a calculator option, you could just do 2 divided by negative 5/10, and then that would actually give you that answer as well.